So I've been playing Wipeout HD. Mario Kart. The game that almost single-handedly kickstarted the entire kart racing genre, leading to many a classic such as CRT, Diddy Kong Dumbledore, and Sonic All-Star Something Something, featuring Danica Patrick. The general idea was that instead of just straight up being about getting high scores and maintaining speed, it would feature shorter tracks, plenty of opposing racers, and most importantly, lots of obstacles, enemies, and item pickups that one could use for some dank-ass vehicle-on-vehicle combat. Nothing quite like racing around like a complete mong, somehow requiring an all-destructing mega bomb, and then fucking everyone else over, spitefully taking first place by force. Not to mention that unrealistic inclusions like jumping, ramps, speed boosts upon drifting, and fucking flight made it a rather exciting affair even when played poorly. Accessible is probably a good way to describe this genre. The fun of racing car without the hardships of actually racing a fucking car. And as such, it became quite the mainstay at multiplayer parties and, as I already said, a home for many now much beloved series and one-off titles. But, oddly enough, one franchise is often left out of the equation. Like it or not, but Wipeout is a fucking kart racer. It has the short looping tracks, the speed boosts, the power-ups, and the friend fuckery, much like one would see in Mario Kart McCrash Team Kong. Developed, produced, and fostered by Studio Liverpool, Wipeout HD, or Wipeout Fury, depending on which exact version you have, is a game that centers around the FX350 Anti-Gravity Racing League. Essentially being a type of best-of compilation featuring tracks, vehicles, songs, and items from all of the older games. It's filled up to the ass with some really swanky-looking cyberpunky levels and some rather spiffy, futuristic hover cars. It doesn't really have a story outside of its setting though, nor does it deal in any overworld bullshit. Every realm, I guess, is just a menu with a handful of tracks and challenges, some of which are optional, and once you've met some arbitrary requirements, you can move on to the next and do the same there. And naturally, each selectable car has its own perks and stats, and you can also unlock new ones as you go along. That's pretty much the name of the game, really. It's a pretty straightforward arcade racer, with the only big differences being that it takes place at ridiculous burnout level speeds, and that grinding the rails or crashing in general can cause thine ride to explode. Like most of its ilk, Wipeout is a game that's easy to learn but hard to master, though the controls at least are very basic. One uses X to accelerate old school style, square to use items, and the triggers are used to shift the balance of your vehicle to either side. Why? Well, the general driving here, rather than being based around drifting or braking, is entirely structured around weight balance. Even the analog stick can be used to tilt your car up or down to compensate for the many bumps, gaps, and jumps, not to mention the insane amount of depth and subtlety R2 and L2 are forced to carry here. The difference between holding down R2, tapping R2, or tapping it twice is fucking massive. Differentiating between full-on U-turns, slight swerves, and being able to dash aside horizontally. Which, when given the inane speed things are going at, doesn't give you a whole lot of room to think about your actions. It's really easy to get caught up in the moment, I guess, aggressively mashing that button like some kind of asshole elegantly nosediving into the nearest wall. And that's pretty much where this game's depths come from. Depth comes from God. It's not as simple as drifting or braking once properly required to carefully balance your weight, all the while being pushed and pulled by the track as well as your opponents. More often than not, I found myself having to lean into the opposite side of a turn before turning in order to kind of shift my momentum, I guess, to launch myself through it, and then also having to rebalance myself afterwards. There's definitely quite a lot of control at your fingertips here, and it's a bit different from most other racing games what I played, or the feel of it is, at least. It's kinda like what I'd imagine an air hockey puck would feel like. Briskly sliding across the track, having to swerve around like a soapbox of doom. Basically, there's a lot to consider but not much time to do, so it is a good thing that the track design plays into this perfectly. mean, just look at all of these humps and bumps as you fly through this dump. Taking sharp turns at breakneck speed, always being tossed around like a wee boat going head to head with a tsundere tsunami.
Weep joke!
My first try on a track often always felt like I was fighting the level itself rather than my fellow racers. What's good about this as well is that the levels in question remain fairly tiny. For me at least, it never took more than 1 or 2 attempts to get to know where all of the boosts and pickups were. Like, check out my first run, clearly missing everything as I drunkenly swerve around like an idiot. But on my second effort, I was already zooming through this shit, hitting all the boosters like a big dick OG. It definitely helps that the booster pads are placed very closely to each other. Like, you can just pick one, like a basic bitch kart racer of course, but if you know what you're doing kind of, you can rub 1 or 2 or even 3 at a time by swiftly doing that double tap horizontal slidey thing I mentioned earlier. I fucking love how much agency you have over your own speed and how it also challenges your abilities regarding that, as it makes shit like the time attack challenges for instance feel less trivial than they do to me typically. Though, unlike most earlier iterations, Wipeout HD is actually fucking playable. Cause I don't know about you, but when I go back to the first game, I always notice how I can't even make it past the first fucking race. Besides me sucking, I'm gonna chalk this up to the fact that it demands a lot from you in terms of staying on track, but in HD they added all sorts of assists and shit that keep you from crashing into railing or flying out of bounds. You can turn these off of course, but I, as well as the game itself, highly recommend using them for your first run of the campaign mode, as without it, you'll most likely die before ever seeing the finish line. You see, the campaign mode becomes much faster gradually, and where callously making sharp turns and rebalancing yourself afterwards works just fine at first, I feel like showing some footage of my high speed run should already give you a pretty good idea of the amount of soapboxing one will be confronted with. Which is cool, actually. Turning the assists off here and there and nailing those turns proper feels hella rewarding, but trying to win a race while having to do that is not something you're gonna be able to do for a while. But yeah, regardless, the weight balancing is a strong fucking mechanic. So much so even that there's an entire game mode built around it called Zone. In this mode, your car will continuously accelerate, breaking barrier after barrier as you go along. You don't even have to hold the X button, it's a pure ass focus on maneuvering through the tightly wound courses. In a way, Zone is to Wipeout what the Crash mode was to Burnout, taking its central gimmick to insane extremes. Shit just keeps going faster and faster until I reached a point where I was barely able to keep a straight line, nay capable to defend myself, and eventually succumbing to the supernova of suck. Because of there not being an overworld, Wipeout HD keeps up a very good pace regarding unlocks and its increase in difficulty. Every race can get you a score, and that score can get you a medal, which then unlocks a new level. These levels can end up being a race or a tournament, meaning that you'd need to deck multiple races in a row, or a time attack, and of course the just now mentioned zone mode. And for all of these, there are separate difficulty settings as well. In any case, unlocking shit through constantly breaking your own records as the speed gradually increases is hella fucking satisfying. As for proper different modes outside of the main campaign though, there aren't really any besides the multiplayer. Well, I guess you can always free race, pick a track, set your own rules, but meh. Which is kinda my only real problem with the game. I mean, with it essentially just being a campaign mode, shit can get a wee bit repetitive in current year. It might be a versatile game, but at the end of the day, the increasing speed and different challenges don't entirely make up for the fact that you're just going about the same 8 tracks for the entire fucking game. Not to mention how the soundtrack is surprisingly tiny and that unlocking certain things can also be rather tough. Which is in part a good thing, but it just doesn't help spicing up the initial lack of variety. Though besides that, it is still one of my favorite racing series and a pretty darn good entry within said series. Just kind of a shame that Sony had to axe its developer. I mean, they crafted quite a unique little world with a cool late 90s, early 2000s European near future aesthetic mixed with a more generic cyberpunky kind of thing. And to me, along with the tight as fuck racing, it's a shame to see that go.